David Bacon. Let's talk about makeup a little later. Okay, welcome to Business Insider.
Morning.
And good morning. Good day to you.
Good day, yes.
Yes. A man of the Central Coast. You've been away and come back and done all sorts of things. This is an opportunity, as you know, for us to get a bit of an insight into what drives people. And David Bacon, tell us about how you got back here to the Central Coast, if you could.
Maybe I'll tell you why I came here in the first place.
Start there. And I knew I wouldn't have this interview to myself anyway, so tell me what you want to tell me.
Because I think it's, my life I think has been one of opportunity that I've capitalised on. I suppose, and I've never thought of myself as being a risk taker, but there have been a lot of calculated risks, I think. So I came here first time in the early 70s. I was working in radio in Tamworth, of all places.
Well, there's a risk.
That was a risk. And I came to see a mate of mine who was working at 2GO. My brother lived here, and I came to see my brother on a long weekend, so I thought I'd drop in and see this guy. He says, I've organised a meeting for you with the boss tomorrow. And the rest is somewhat history. I was interviewed by the legendary Keith Graham, who a lot of people on the Central Coast would know, and he said, righto, we'll offer you a job in the newsroom, and I took it. And it was there that I finished my journalism cadetship. So I lived on the Central Coast through most of the 70s, which was the great time of the 70s, I think, and the great time of Gosford. It was when I've heard people talk recently about when Gosford was bustling and thriving.
And cafes stayed open, and
there wasn't anything you couldn't do in Gosford at the time, and it was a great time. It was also a great time of 2GO, where it was less than a year old. And Keith had a terrific philosophy in broadcasting, and that was localism. And he had a culture in that organisation where everybody got involved.
That great period of the 70s has now seen it decline to a point where we are rebuilding. Can we kind of leap forward now to the mid?
Yeah, so I came back in about 2003.
Okay,
I still had connection. I had children here who had never left. And so I had connections here. I was also recovering from an illness. And so it seemed like a good idea at the time to come back to somewhere which would be easy to settle in. And I found that very easy because the job that I'd had was quite a high profile, and when I arrived back, people remembered me. So that was really good, but it still doesn't put bread on the table. And so I was also not totally physically fit, having had surgery. So, but I was able to secure a role, and that was the Executive Officer of the Area Consultative Committee, where I could bring my global experience to the Central Coast, basically. I'd reached a stage in my career where I knew I'd had a fortunate career. I was ready to give some of that back somewhere. So that's what I did. I took a role which would assist regional development.
And it really was a forerunner, because there has been amalgamations, changes, governments do this, don't they? And that formative committee that you were on, what's the closest thing to that now?
It's called Regional Development Australia.
Okay.
But it was also a great learning experience. I got to know a lot of people, but I got to learn as well how difficult it is for those sorts of regional bodies to achieve anything, because government hates to give away any of its power. The local elected representatives don't really want those committees to have any real decision making. They still want to be the influencers of policy. So it sort of taught me that those regional bodies have great difficulty in actually achieving anything. We had a real role because we assisted people to get grants. And so in my time in the job and under Peter Hale's chairmanship, we got over $4 million in grants, which we leveraged into projects worth about $15 or $16 million. So during that time, the area consultative
What were some of the big
committee,
ones of that?
Some of the big ones there were the building of the regional tourism centre up at Carrion. the completion of the Trojans Rugby Club out at Terrigal. So these are community facilities, particularly the Trojans, where, you know, it's a great facility and a great facility for rugby. You know, life is not all about hard work. We need recreation facilities to keep our whole community happy, vibrant and active. What else did we do? We got $150,000 for the Regional Youth Arts Warehouse, which is in Gosford, part of the Regional Youth Support Service. There's a facility there where kids can come and play music and paint and act and photograph and do all sorts of things. And a lot of these things, there's a lot goes on the Central Coast that people don't realise. It isn't, we're very big at knocking ourselves, but in fact there's a lot of good stuff goes on. We just need a few icons like a regional performing arts centre or music centre, call it what you want. We've got a symphony orchestra, but because there's nowhere for them to play often, we forget that we've got these things.
The community is a passion of yours, there's no doubt about that.
And it is now, yes, yeah.
Well, I'd go and suggest that's why you got into the consultative committee originally as well, to do a different...
To do something,
so that's my argument anyway. So it's been there longer than you think, David, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
don't argue with the interviewer, please.
Yes.
The place I wanted to go was Pacific Link, which is affordable housing.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I'm the chairman of Pacific Link.
Indeed.
And
tell me what you're doing there,
I fell into that. A colleague of mine said we need some people to join the board. And so a number of people joined the board at the time. Yeah, that's about social housing. I mean, we have one of, we have a crisis in our midst. Half of the people who need social housing have got it. So where are the other half sleeping? There's 30 people sleep in Kibble Park every night, you know. There's nowhere for them to go. Some of them may not want to sleep anywhere else. For whatever reasons, various reasons, often they're affected by mental illness and things like that. But there are people who are couch surfing, staying with relatives where it doesn't work and there's conflict and those sorts of things. So Pacific Link now, you know, the people who set it up in the early days were pioneers in that sector. Today it's now grown up a lot more. It has a very commercial board, because I don't think anymore we can totally rely on government to bankroll the things that a community needs. So the board of Pacific Link, and with its CEO, is actively looking at innovative ways. How do we create more housing stock? We certainly don't want to build ghettos. We don't want those tall buildings which are full. We'd like to you know, have housing throughout the community. And you know, people who live in social housing are just normal, ordinary people. They just, for some various reasons in their life, it may be a short-term thing, have been down on their luck or something. And as a rich society, we should be there to assist them. And companies like Pacific Link, because it is a company, I mean, we rely on government funding for our survival. But
you're also looking at providing a commercial model.
Well, we are. Yes, we are. Because I think that's where the future lies. The government pot is not bottomless. So we have to find ways to attract private investment. It might be that we set up a fund. People may want to put 100 grand of their super into it and be happy with a return of 7–10% or something. I think that's the only way. One of the biggest costs of building, and particularly in this region, is land. Now, government and council and everybody has lots of land. And we've had very, very constructive conversations with Gosford and Wyong councils to date. Our footprint of Pacific Link, incidentally, goes from the Hawkesbury River to Port Stephens. So it's quite big. We manage assets worth almost $400 million. It's quite an enterprise, and nobody knows anything about it. A large proportion of those assets are owned by the state government, but a lot of them are owned by private
but you're,
individuals.
yeah, you are charged with maintaining and developing.
It is our total responsibility to look after them. That's absolutely right. So we have very good maintenance programs. We have a huge roster of tradesmen who get work as a result of the maintenance that's required. So we pride ourselves on running a pretty good ship. But our challenge, I think, and it's one which the board is actively pursuing, is to be able to get more homes that people need. And we're talking to all sorts of people. We shouldn't think of the model as just a 3-bedroom brick veneer home. They might look, who knows what they're going to look like.
Do you have enough, I'm just looking for alliances now, do you have enough construction companies and developers coming to you with alternatives and options, and are they thinking the same way you're thinking?
They are starting to think the way we are thinking. We do have people coming to us now, which wouldn't have happened even 2 years ago. I've only been the chairman for about 2 years, and I'm not saying it's all my work. We have a good board now, a very good board, and we have a very good CEO. But we've also increased the profile, and so people are aware that there are potentially, we haven't nailed down these models yet. One of the difficulties at this time is with a new government, they are still working their way through the policy environment. So we tend to be waiting. There's a bit of a policy vacuum. It's not that they're not working on it. It's just that it hasn't been announced. And so we're anxiously awaiting that, and I'm sure potential investors are anxiously awaiting that as well, so that they can become involved. We can develop these models. I mean, at the moment, we don't know how people will make any money out of it.
Yeah,
but if people are making money out of it, housing's being created, people are being housed, and there's nothing wrong with that model, I don't believe.
Excellent. We've got you warmed up on a couple of areas, but now is the rant time, Mr. Bacon. 60 seconds to get something off your chest.
You warned me of this, and I consulted my wife.
Oh dear.
And she said, well, that's impossible to find a subject that you would talk to for just 60 seconds.
Yes. I'm going to ask you to well, stretch it to 75. Go for it.
But I'll tell you one thing, and it relates back to Pacific Link. I mean, we've just appointed a compliance manager. We need a compliance manager now. And I think this is one of the things which is making it so difficult, particularly for small business. We're lucky. We can afford it. It's a very well-run business. And I talk to the CEO and I say, Keith, I think we're going to need somebody. And he said, I agree, let's get somebody in. But if you're a little business with 3 people, you can't afford these sorts of things. I think that there is too much bureaucracy, there is too much red tape, and small business must be drowning under all the compliance that they have to do. The second thing I want to rant about is this, that's right, is this seemingly attempt at the moment. We see lots of controversial subjects in the media at the moment about live exports and those sorts of things. It's this thing to shut down debate. If we don't agree with you, we'll have an inquiry into the media and threaten you with an inquiry if we don't like what you're saying. I trained as a journalist. I worked in the fast-moving consumer goods industry where freedom of choice was absolutely paramount. Yet I see politicians forgetting that. I mean, it is one of the tenets, the fundamentals of our society is freedom of speech. And I see that I don't even know whether politicians realising they're threatening that by wanting to inquire into the media, by wanting to put restrictions on, by wanting to license newspapers, for goodness sake. You only license things which you need to control. I'm also still involved in community radio. You issue a licence because the spectrum is limited. But if people had the money, they can set up a newspaper on every corner if they wanted to. Let them do it. There's too much attempts to control our lives, and it's tragic because I think we don't have enough serious matters to think about.
Yeah. But again, David, and now you've tempted me to go on further, and goodness knows whether we've got time, but people let the great, I say this hesitantly, uncaring group, are they apathetic? I'm not sure, but they let people take control. It's easier for the government to make a decision and say, well, that wasn't me, that was the government.
And government does a pretty good job, incidentally.
Yes.
They do a pretty good job. We can walk our streets of an evening in most places and it's fine. We go to not that the government provides the food, but the environment is such where we can go to the supermarket.
You touched on it before.
Today.
We are a rich country.
We're a very rich country. We go to the supermarket and there's any manner of food and goods that we want, and if my favourite brand is not there, there's likely to be 6 more. So we are very lucky and we're very privileged. And this is why things like the live export ban, I don't think Australians think about it in the right context. We think about it from our own perspective. Well, some jobs might be lost. And that's true, and I mean, it's crazy. However, what about the people of Indonesia who need to eat? You know, these sorts of things we don't think sufficiently enough. I've been very fortunate in my career. I had an international job for 10 years. I travelled the world. I've been to the 4 corners of the planet. I've seen how others lived. We've employed people in the company that I worked in. And so I have been very, very fortunate to be able to develop these perspectives about people and come back to Australia and realised how blessed we are and how fortunate we are by an accident of birth. And I think Australians haven't seen enough of the world to be sufficiently concerned. You may then say to me, David, what are you doing about it? And
I think before you answer that, let me answer. I think you're doing a lot. I think if we all did half of what you do, that would be a cool place. I'll stop giving you a warm feeling. David, an extraordinary time. You know, lots of activity, lots of community work and commercial work, and significant commercial work. The next 3 years for David Bacon, how are you going to judge that? Have you got some plans there?
Yeah. I've learned to plan my life. I took 2003 off, 2002 off, and actually became a career counsellor. So I sort of think quite a bit about those things. Being a director of Pacific Link and being the chairman of the company has whetted my appetite for things that you can do when you're in a position to make decisions, or you can lead people to make decisions. I think I'd like to serve on more boards, commercial as well as social. I've been on a number of other boards on the Central Coast, and they still have the spectre of government all over them. You can't really make decisions. Whereas commercial boards have a great appeal to me, assisting people. I've been fortunate. I've worked at the very top level of international business, so I've seen a lot. I've been involved in a lot. I think I can, and I'd love to be involved in more commercial boards to help smaller fledgling businesses make a fortune, because they're the people, once they grow, they're going to employ more people.
Okay. We need to work out how we can pay you in that role.
Because
it needs that guidance, and that counsel needs to be paid.
And it should be, and people should be paid for these things. The board of Pacific Link now receives an honorarium, and that way you attract quality people who are prepared to give up their time. We've got people giving up their time on that who would normally be billing $300 an hour minimum. Now you say to them, well, we want you to come and meet for a couple of hours. Yeah, they will, if they're A, getting the satisfaction, but B, I mean, it doesn't anywhere nearly make up for the revenue they're losing, but at least there's a signal that says, well, we do value your time. And so, yeah, I mean, people need to accept that, and I can tell you, in my household, my wife is sick of me giving it away.
And we're talking about your time for business decisions, I'm sure.
Yes.
The opportunity for Business Insider is to get some of those companies up here that you can be on boards for. So I hope we're successful so you can be successful.
I'd love to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate.